Good evening. This is Bottomline live on Metro TV. My name is Winston Taki, and tonight we'll continue with part two of the conversation with the Vice President of Imani in regards to Ghana's history. Last week we had a very interesting conversation, and we took us through the debt structure from 1970 to the current state, HIPC, what we did, what we didn't do, and also what has brought us where we are today as a nation. He's with us here in the studio and is going to take us through that particular conversation. Good evening, Mr. Bright.
Yes. So when you look at the issue of whether or not we should go to the IMF, it's really a simple matter of whether or not we'll keep borrowing or not. From the budget, it's quite clear that we'll keep borrowing. In fact, maybe a quarter of the money that we need will come from borrowing, the minimum. So given that context, you just have to compare what you will get from borrowing as you normally do or what you get from IMF. And you can see that about 9%, roughly 9% is what you will get in the commercial markets in dollar terms, much higher in cedi terms, and around 2% what you get in the IMF. So if you're going to keep borrowing and there's cheaper money, there has to be a very strong reason why you don't want the cheaper money. Secondly, we know that even beyond the money that we pay in terms of interest, we also pay all manner of other funny charges that goes to all manner of other actors when you go and borrow in the commercial markets. So in the Eurobond market, for instance, we are paying investment banks, we are paying lawyers. Of course, there are people that are happy that you keep paying all of these people because you have relationships, right? But is that a national interest? That because of the fact that there are relationships we've built with JP Morgan and others, they should continue to get their fees and the rest of it, even if that money is more expensive than IMF.
I see fees, expenses, joint lead managers, all those people.
All these people get paid when we go and borrow through the Eurobond window. And the cost totally when you finish, by the time you are through your road shows and all of them, you have accounted all of those, the discounts you have to give for them to sell, this additional cost that sometimes pass up, which we don't account for because nobody's looking. You get my point? Mm-hmm. So there are people that benefit if you don't go to IMF, as well as people that benefit that when you go to IMF. Mm-hmm. But the people that benefit when you don't go to IMF are primarily commercial people. They make money whenever we go and do the Eurobond filings. The other point is, yes, the IMF is not a silver bullet, but that's not the point. That's not what we are talking about. We are not talking about whether or not the IMF can come and save us. We are talking about whether or not you will keep borrowing. If you will keep borrowing, then start lowering the cost of the debt, because as I explained in the beginning, that has been one of the major reasons why we've had challenges. So the IMF is not a solution, but in the current situation that you are in the different existing responses to the challenges, the IMF may be better than some of the other responses you are using. So if you are going to borrow Eurobond, for instance, you are just trying to fix our rating so you take us back to Eurobond and borrow at 9% and give all manner of fees to other people. That's why I say, well, go to IMF and borrow for 2%. The only issue will be whether or not the prescriptions that the IMF give are in the national interest. But you can bring it and let us discuss it. It's an agreement you sign with them. If you want to be transparent, you go to the IMF, you have an agreement, you put the agreement to public debate. Maybe even take the agreement to parliament. So my argument is that the IMF is not seen as a solution to our issues. But to the extent we keep borrowing, the IMF may be a better option, unless we're going to stop borrowing, in which case we can have the debate about the IMF. True, we've gone to the IMF more than most African countries. This is my own colleague, Professor Bobkin's analysis. In Africa, Ghana has gone to the IMF more than every country except 4 of them, 4 other countries. Out of the 55 countries, we are like 5th or so. And every time we've gone to the IMF, these are all different programs we have the IMF, we've come back around roughly 4 years. So it is clear that the IMF will not solve your problem. The issue is about the cost of addressing your current problem. If the IMF can help you bring down that cost, then nobody should dismiss the IMF, because they could be part of a comprehensive solution. My last point, which is, I think, is the most critical point, is that we have to stop this aggrandizement, this tendency to talk big, dream big, and match the little we can do to reality. You want to do Ghana's case and spend 100 billion cedis. Whose money? Whose money are you going to spend on Ghana case for 100 billion cedis? I've just walked you through the tightness of our current revenue situation. So how would somebody even come up with something like that? That I want to spend 100 billion cedis on Ghana case. And every time we listen to the government, there's one or the other project of this nature where we are talking big, dreaming big, but not acting in accordance with reality. That's what I meant when I said it's a big Bamba dance. We always want to Bamba. The time has come for us to become more moderate in our ambition. Doesn't mean that we have to stop having national pride and the can-do spirit, but be more realistic, plan effectively, and execute. Because if we keep collecting all of this money, and yes, all we are doing is expecting oil and gold to save us, it will not. They have not saved us in the last 30 years. They will not save us now.
Will e-levy save us as projected by government?
No, because e-levy, in their most optimistic forecast, is 6.9 billion. The amount that I showed you, the gap that we have, even if they manage to increase taxes by 40%, which is impossible, will still be 5 times more than the best output we can have for e-levy. You get it? So e-levy is too small. Number 2, because people don't like e-levy, they will do everything they can to circumvent, so they will not even get the money they are expecting. Number 3, a lot of other countries have tried similar things to e-levy. About 8 countries in Africa have tried similar things to e-levy. None of them are making huge amount of money from e-levy. None of them have been transformed by anything like a e-levy. Uganda is making something in the region of a few $100 million. Zimbabwe is making something in the few of a few $100 million. Nobody has made billions of dollars from e-levy. And the problem that we have, unless we fundamentally restructure, requires billions of dollars to solve. So e-levy is a complete red herring.
Irrespective, as you've shown us, you've shown us the history of we going back for a sip anytime we are thirsty as a country. With that regards, can the e-levy be served as a collateral for future borrowing?
Well, it can, but then we've had other other taxes that have been treated in that manner. The famous EXLA is an example where we try and use petroleum taxes to leverage. That can help, but it does introduce 2 other important facts. Every tax has a cost. Usually it's the cost to growth. Because a tax is simply money that we will spend in the economy. We give it to the government to spend for us. If the government is not a very efficient spender, it reduces our growth. So an example is e-levy has a problem we call the accumulation problem. Because everybody pays at different levels of the supply chain, you want to bake bread, you want to transfer the money to buy the flour, you pay. To buy the margarine, you pay. To buy the whatever, you pay. When you finish baking the bread and you want to send it to the market, you pay the driver, you pay e-levy. The driver, when he hands the thing over and he wants to buy fuel and he wants to use mobile, he pays. All that accumulates into a huge amount of money that goes into the final price. So e-levy is not like a sales tax, which is effect at the retail end. It builds up throughout the value chain. Everybody who does a payment in that value chain pays. What that means is eventually the cost to the consumer is high. So the consumer reduces how much they consume. This is the same consumer who was going to pay VAT. Because now he's spending less, you are getting less VAT. So e-levy can actually shift some of the taxes from other places into e-levy. The net effect is that you're not going to get as much as you think. Even if you decide to use it to securitize for another loan, the people that are going to give the loan, they are not stupid. They will also make their extrapolation of what they think it will yield. That might mean, therefore, that you are limited in how much of it you can borrow. Some of them will wait and see what year 1 and year 2 brings about before they decide to give you money. So regardless of how you dice it or slice it, e-levy does not generate enough money. The government has not properly accounted for its cost to growth and other aspects of the digital economy. And so it is not an important contributor to the solutions we are looking for. Whether you do it or you don't do it, it's not an important contributor. It can be discussed on its own merits.
All right. Does the Auditor General's report provide a good framework to revisit our accountability structure?
True, but it does not get anywhere near the 2 big issues. One being how much you are paying for the debt, because you are borrowing so much in commercial markets. The second one being how much you are paying for the public sector, because we've stopped doing structural reform. The costs that arises because of inefficiencies in the public sector are exactly the ones that we reflect in the Auditor General report. Because the Auditor General report, we look at the financial numbers, which are actually not very interesting. It's in the performance audits that we should be looking at. A lot of the financial numbers that the Auditor General presents are not actually well done. I've written extensively about it. Some of the actual analysis don't add up. They do not satisfy the bounds of materiality. They report things that are not really relevant.
In what sense?
To give you an example, if you go into some of the Auditor General reports, you will see a list of supposed infractions. Some of them, they will tell you somebody has made an infraction, it's 1 cedi. And they'll all be there. That means that somebody is not applying materiality. Because if you apply materiality, you remove those things. They are not relevant. Right? So my assessment is that there isn't enough, when the auditors run around and they bring in their reports, the people that actually finally compile the report, they don't do a good job. The filtering is not very effective. Secondly, some of the ways they clustered our irregularities don't make sense. So if, for instance, a particular organization is owing NHIS and it's a government agency and it's not paid NHIS for instance, that's not an irregularity. That is part of your fiscal mess. That's not a financial irregularity per se. You get my point? If we are not paying NHIS because we are a government organization and the government is not giving us money, how is that an infraction? So how do you mix that with someone who has stolen money? So the way that they've constructed the report is not very useful. But all its insights point to the same point that I'm making, which is that our public sector...
And they still make recommendations in the report.
Yes, they make some recommendations, but the recommendations are often not very well linked to the bulk of the report. By which I'm giving you practical examples. That you cannot mix the types of irregularities the way that they mix them, creating the impression that they are all the same type of irregularity and therefore they require the same forms of addressing the problem. If the government is not paying a state funded institution, and because of that they are owing statutory obligations or owing on their statutory obligations, that is not an irregularity. That is a governance issue that affects the entire government as a whole. So you don't make it look as if that particular institution can solve that problem, which is the purpose of audit. What is the purpose of coming to audit Metro TV? And then I spend my time talking about things like, you know what, there's too much traffic outside here. What was Metro TV supposed to do? So the argument we've made about Auditor General reports is that they should improve the quality of the reports. Number two, all that they tell us is indicative in the fact that our public sector requires serious reform. And unfortunately, that reform process has stalled. Because that reform process has stalled, we have a huge challenge on our hand because we cannot be able to reduce the cost while increasing quality of service and increasing opportunities for areas such as education, health, and the rest to absorb more skilled workforces. Partly, the government ought to find a way to encourage private participation so that the middle classes are not entirely dependent on government services. If they don't do that, and the government continues to be the biggest employer of all doctors in the country, all nurses in the country, all teachers in the country, then we need to rethink our economic paradigm as a whole. We'll have to rethink our economic paradigm as a whole because it will be primarily a state welfare-based economy in which government is the primary driver.
But what is the cost of that?
But we've made it clear several times that the private sector should be the motor of growth, should be the engine of growth and the rest of it. And we make our policy as if that's what we believe. So we cannot continue to run a massive welfare state while pretending that that welfare state is the same efficient motor that will push us forward. We have to balance some of those things. And it will take a focus on structural reform. That will not happen when the government is continuing to make promises like this and is continuing to sell this vision that all of the things we are seeing now are temporary blips due to COVID and things like that. And that once COVID goes and once they get e-levy and the rest, we'll go back on the path of towards greatness. There's no such path to greatness. I've explained to you the origin of our problem, the structural nature of it, and the work that is required to take us back to the path of true reform. And that is why I'm very worried about the way public sector reform is being done in Ghana today. I was recently in a banter with his former senior minister where I was making the argument that you don't go and borrow money from the World Bank to come and reform the public sector. And then you spend almost 80% of the money on cars. Cars don't reform the public sector. So those are the kind of problems that we need to identify and very aggressively tackle head-on. Thank you.
Before we say thank you to that, I want to get one last reaction from you. Already, you've described the budget revenue projections as overly ambitious. Then what will you propose as a solution in terms of raising enough capital? Because already we've seen crude oil prices going up, which in a way should have helped help subsidize the price at the pump. But we've not seen that. Now, this ambitious revenue structure, how can we meet it as a country?
We have to start from the expenditure side because the revenue side has immense rigidities linked to the economy. The expenditure side is more under our control. We are the ones spending that money. Within that expenditure envelope, some of the things you can't do anything about because you are paying debt and you are paying workers. Together, they constitute nearly 75% of all the revenues you raise. So that is fixed. You definitely need to start thinking again about getting multilateral and bilateral partners back in the game because they give you cheaper credit compared to the commercial credit. So this, we are not talking to IMF, it's a meaningless drivel. You are still borrowing at very high cost. So you need to have multilateral and bilateral partners coming in. That means that your foreign affairs ministry has to be reconverted to focus primarily on development cooperation, like the way they do in Rwanda. They're all over the place looking for people to bring money into Rwanda, people to come and partner them and do things. Our foreign ministry is trying to project Ghanaian strength as opposed to getting deals. Doesn't make sense. The second thing is that you need to have value for money analysis where you don't pack every institution in Ghana with political cronies. Every board in Ghana is now filled with people that are just praise singers of the government. You don't get serious value for money analysis. You don't get serious scrutiny of public spending when all public boards in the country are filled with cronies of the government. It doesn't make sense. Let the unions vote for representatives. Let GMA vote for representatives. Find ways in which established large stakeholder organizations, peasant associations, etc., let them vote and elect people who you appoint on boards so that you can have real accountability in the country. If we don't, every project is going to be 3 times the cost of what it should be. We've been looking at the cost of things like the railways we are building, the airports we are building, the roads we are building, and Ghana often is spending maybe twice what other people in other countries in East Africa and Southern Africa are spending on the same items, similar items, so that it's same specs. We can't continue that path. We have to, at some point, accept that the way we've run the country for the last 30 years is not sustainable. And we need to bring back good governance, more accountability. These are not things that you can just wave a wand and to go away. Do an e-levy here, tax people on e-commerce. They are not enough. They need to be fundamental reform of the economy and fundamental reform of the governance of the country.
Let me get your final take on Russia-Ukraine crisis, Ghana economy.
Ghana economy. Well, Ghana economy, I think certainly there are issues to do with the commodity surge. Some of that helps us, some of that hurts us. Because we are a net importer of fuel, even though we export more theoretically, what actually is ours is a small proportion. So the net effect on us when fuel prices go up is higher than the benefit we make when fuel prices go up. And given the fact that the crisis has led to that situation, we have a challenge there. Secondly, we import a lot of our food. And those 2 regions, Ukraine and Russia, are major food baskets for wheat and other commodities and the rest. So that we're going to see that impact in food prices. The third is that there are some fascinating connections we have with Russia that are not very well known. Lukoil, one of the major producers of oil in our space, is actually a big Russian company. And the company that buy our oil, one major one is Litasco. If sanctions were to be extended not only to companies incorporated in Russia, but companies just owned by Russia, that could affect some of the long-term contracts we have with them to pick up deliveries of oil cargo from Ghana. So there are a number of exposures that we have, not as significant, but it's the same that most countries have, not particularly significant.
Thank you very much, Bryce Simmons. It's been a pleasure having you tonight.
Pleasure having you.
Always. We will also be following up in regards to any economic development going forward.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you so much. So, Mr. Bryce Simmons is the Vice President for Imani Africa. He's taken us through the Ghana's historical expenditure structure. We've looked at the revenue. We've looked at COVID, pre-COVID, post-COVID. We've looked at also in terms of what we must do in public sector restructuring and all the related issues that has to do with Ghana's economy. You can also share your conversation, what you think on our WhatsApp line and also on Facebook and on Twitter as well. This has been Bottomline Live on Metro TV. My name is Winston Taki. Keep tuned to Metro TV for more programs, and so I'll have to say good night for now. Have a wonderful day.